In this video, I'm going to walk you through the project that I want you to work in groups of 2 or 3 on making your own computer game. Now we're going to lead you through how to make a very simple and old arcade game called Pong, which I guess is based on table tennis. So Pong, you may have seen something that looks like this. We're going to make something. We're going to make something very similar to that, except that what we're going to use is only going to be for one player, or at least to start off with, it's only going to be for one player. So first of all, what I suggest you do is you go to the Khan Academy lessons on if statements. So if we go to logic and if statements, the first is a video on logic and if statements. The first step is a video, and in that video what they're going to do is they're going to show you an example of a ball moving across the screen. Now that's based on the animations that we're already familiar with. What we'd like to do is we'd like the code to now interact with other elements of the screen. So in this case we want the ball, when it hits the side, to bounce back. Now if we update the code, what we're going to do is we're going to use an if statement, which we should now be familiar with because we've now used if statements. And what we want is we want this ball to now bounce using this if statement here. So that's the if statement there. Now the problem is that although the ball bounces, it only bounces off one side. We really want it to bounce off both sides. So then we're going to go to this here, and we can see if we change the code there, we can make the ball bounce off both sides. That's what is discussed in this video, and it talks about why we use numbers like 375 rather than 400, because even though the canvas is 400 wide, we're going to use 375 to take into account the radius of the ball. Now once you've done that, you can then go to the bouncy ball challenge, and what the bouncy ball challenge will do is it will first ask you, this time we've got the ball going vertically rather than horizontally, and it's not bouncing, so it wants us to make it bounce. So to do that, we need to add an if statement. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to do and how the if statements compare to the if statements we may have seen before. So if we go to the if statements that we used in Excel, we have the if statements are written with a capital IF, and then we have a bracket, and inside the brackets we have 3 values. We have the logical test, we have the value if true, and the value if false. Now each of these three parts has to be separated with a comma, right, to say which is the test, what we do if it's true, and what we do if it's false. And then we put a parenthesis on either side of that function. The way that we do that in JavaScript is a little bit different to how we do it in Excel. So if we look again, Excel, we have capital IF, we put our parentheses, we have a condition, the code that we want to run if it's true, and the code that we want to run if it's false. In JavaScript it's a little bit different. In JavaScript we have a lowercase if, and the case matters, and then we have our parentheses, and inside our parentheses we just have the condition, just this first part here. And then after that, in our curly brackets, we have the code. Now we only put in the code that we want to run if it's true, at least to start off with. And the code that we put in here, we just write like any other code with semicolons at the end of each line. Now typically what we'll do is we'll have our if, and then we'll have our indents for each line of code, and then at the end of the if statement we'll put this curly bracket. And the reason we do that is so that way we can very easily tell, even if we have a lot of code, we can very easily tell when one if starts and the other one finishes, just by having everything indent. You might even have an if within an if, and that will indent as well. So here I have an if, I've got my condition, and this is the code, the first line of code I want to run, the second line of code, the third line of code, and then the curly bracket to close it up. Now in this situation, the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the pseudocode that we want to run. So the pseudocode is just a verbal description of what we want to do, or a written description. It's using just regular English language to describe what we want to do. In this case, it's if the vertical position of the ball reaches the bottom of the screen or the canvas, then the ball should move in the opposite direction, up. Now we can write that using a flowchart, and the flowchart for the if part of the question, right, the if part of the statement, we can use if the ball has reached the bottom of the screen. If that is yes, if that's true, then the ball moves up. Now we'll do that here. So we're going to use this if statement, and I'm just going to stick this in there. So using my hint, it says the draw function. I've got some stuff above, and then somewhere below I want to put in my own if statement. So I'm going to put it here in the middle, and I'm going to write if parentheses y is greater than, well, we watched in the video that we want 375, and we're going to put in our curly bracket, and then it's going to say, oh no, you've opened the curly bracket but you haven't closed it. Now I could just type in my speed gets -2 semicolon, and then close my parentheses, and now the oh no sky is gone and said, hey, you did it. So we're going to go to the next step, and this time we're going to copy. Let's have a look at what's wrong. So the problem is that when we restart our thing, at the moment it's bouncing, but it's only bouncing off the bottom. We want it to bounce off the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to copy the code, and I'm going to paste it below, and I'm going to say that I don't want the ball to move if y is bigger than a number. I want it if the y is low, if the number is less than 25. And if that happens, I want the ball to go in the other direction. So let's restart it now and see what happens. So if you follow these instructions, bouncing off the floor and the ceiling, and you follow the hint, you should be able to do that, and you should be able to make good progress. Now after that, there's some different options on what you can do. You can keep going past the bouncy ball challenge and keep working on things like else if and a few other, you can learn about booleans and a few other functions. But for the moment, what I really want you to do is I would like you to work on developing your own version of Pong. Now I will show you an example of what that looks like. This is one that I've created, and I've done this in P5.js so that I can share this this program if I want. Here's one that a student has made that he's posted up, and you can access if you go to this website. You can play this game of Pong yourself, and in his case, when the ball goes past the edge, the game stops and says game over. So that's something that you can work to. That would be an example of a successful completion of this project. Now, to go through the steps, the first thing you'll need to do is complete that challenge, the bouncy ball challenge, by making the ball bounce from the top and the bottom. Then what you'll need to do is you'll need to be able to figure out how to make the ball bounce from left to right. Now you could just watch the video again, the lesson on if statements, but it's pretty easy to make the ball change and go in the opposite direction. So what we need is we need a variable called x equals to a variable for x, and we need to change our values that were originally y in our formula to have x in our formula. So let's go and do that now. So we're going to go back to our project. We're done with that. Done with that. Okay, so now instead of using the variable y, we want to create a new variable. So I'm just going to create var x. So x is going to be the x position of my ball. Now normally I would like to have a more meaningful name. Instead of having x and y, I'd call it like x position of the ball. And the thing that I want my ellipse to be drawn based on that value. So I need to change the x position of my ellipse. So if I look here, this is the x position of my ball, this is the y position of my ball. I just want my y ball to be just the middle of the thing. So I'm going to make it 200. And instead of it being the y value that we check for, I want it to check for the x value. I want to see if the x position, the horizontal position of the ball, now I want to see where that is compared to where we are. So now I want to see if the x position of the ball is greater than 365, and I want to check if the y position, the x position on this side is low enough. If the x position here is low enough, I want the x position to start, the speed to go in the other direction. So now I have to remember to make sure that I use x here so that and so when I do this, I really should start to use a spin-off, right? So I should create a spin-off so that way, because at the moment it says, whoops, it looks like you've changed something, you shouldn't have it. And now Khan Academy doesn't know how to help you anymore. And so we make a spin-off, and now it won't worry. It will say, no, you're doing something on your own, and that's fine. Okay, so we did that. What we want to look at here is, in this case we're still looking at the y value, but this works for the x value as well. So we're saying in our pseudocode, we want to be asking the question, here we said if the vertical position of the ball reaches the bottom of the screen or the canvas, then the ball should move in the opposite direction. What we want to do is we want to start using more technical words, right? So we can take our pseudocode and we can start changing it to real code. So we want to say if the y value of the ellipse is greater than 400, then the speed must get a negative value. Okay, and then we can say if the y value of the ellipse is greater than 375. Why 375? Well, like we said in the video, that the introductory video, they talk about the radius of the ball. So if we zoom in here, if you know the whole canvas is 400, that means the line where the center of the ellipse, because remember we draw ellipses from their center, the center of the ellipse is 375. That's the point where the ball should bounce. And we're going to set the speed as -2. Now you can use whatever values you'd like. Personally, I would actually rather not use -2. I'd rather it have a named variable. But you know what, for the moment, we're just going to keep things simple. We're going to use -2. So now I'm going to change my flow chart to say if y is greater than 375, speed should get -2. Okay, so let's go back to our bouncy ball. Okay, so we're going to restart. Okay, so if we restart, we're going to go through this again and say we can start over. Okay, so somewhere here we need to type in that if statement. So we're saying if y is larger than 375, and we could put our close our parentheses. That's going to be our condition statement, and then we need to put our a curly bracket to open where we're going to put our code. And it says, hey, you know, you've opened a curly bracket and you haven't closed it, so I'm going to close it just so it doesn't freak out. And then in here, I'm going to run my code that's going to happen whenever the y value, the vertical value gets too big. I'm going to say the speed should change direction. So the speed that we're adding to make our animation run, our speed should change, so we should get -2. And I put a semicolon to make it run. And we can restart that and we can watch it bounce. Okay, great. Now the problem is that now it's bouncing off the floor. We need to go to the next step. Now we need to bounce off the ceiling. So let's go back to our pseudocode. So if the y value of the ellipse is greater than 375, then the speed should get -2. Also, we need, if the ball reaches the top of the canvas, the ball should now go down. So to do that, we just want to see why is it 25, why isn't it 0? Well, the top of the canvas is 0. But if we take into account the radius of the ball, the line where the thing should turn around is at 25, because our radius of the ball is 25. So we did that. And then we keep going down to our next line, and we're going to say, okay, well now our code is going to look like this. We're going to have our two if statements, and we've got our if y is greater than 375, then speed gets -2. If y is less than 25, then speed gets +2, or just 2. And don't forget we need semicolons after each line of code. So we can write that. Now we indent, so that way we can read our code easily. So we're going to go back to here, and we're going to just type that in again. We type in a new if, so that it bounces off the ceiling. If y is less than 25, then we open our curly brackets, we type in speed, gets the value of 2, and then we close our curly brackets, and now it's happy. And we now finish that challenge. Okay. I should point out that sometimes it doesn't look like it's quite touching the top, or it can do some funny things, especially when you're only using half the screen. It can look a bit funny, it can look a bit strange, like it's not touching. But I wouldn't lose too much sleep over that. Okay. Anyway. So next, it's worth pointing out that we could have done this all in one if, but it's a little bit more complicated. Now, if you do some other extra lessons on Khan Academy, they will talk about if else, where we can ask else questions, where we can say if y is bigger than 375, then do that. If not, we ask another if, and then say, is it less than 25? If that's true, then we do that. That's the way we code that, but I'm not going to go into that today because that's really a lesson on its own. But just to go one last line is to say that if we have our if, we have our condition 1. If it's true, we do condition 1, or it's true. If not, we do condition 2, the code for condition 2. And if none of those things are true, then we run our code if none of those things are true. Okay, so we're going back to this. These are the steps that we want to do to complete our own project. First of all, we're going to make the ball bounce horizontally. So I've already started that on another project. We'll create a spin-off and we'll just do that again. Okay, so we're going to use X values. We're going to change the X values. We're going to make the ball animate by increasing the X value, so it's going to move horizontally. We want to change our ellipse by moving the X direction. We're going to make the ball sit right in the middle, which is 200, just to make it different. We're going to make it 300, so it's going to be a little bit lower to the bottom. And it says, hey, you're using this value X, but you've never created a value X, so I'm going to create the value X so it knows what I'm talking about. So you can see that's the effect of where the X value is going to change where this ball keeps bouncing back and forth. Now what I'd really like to have happen is I'd really like to have this ball go up and down and bounce around at all the sides. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to try, now that I've completed that, is I'm going to try and make the ball bounce back and forth off the side of the screen. So we're going to do that by just setting our values. That will probably do. What I'm going to do is I need to make it ask a question, is it touching either of the walls, the sides, the top, or the bottom? So to do that, I need to use Y values. It should still be X. So I'm going to ask, is it touching the left side? Wait, is it touching the, what's this side? This side, is it touching the right side? No. Is it touching the left side? Is it touching the bottom? Or is it touching the top? I could put those comments in there like to help me remember, but I'm not going to do that because I'm lazy. Okay, so once we've done that, the only thing is that there's no point where it's ever actually asking what's the Y value. There's no point where the ellipse is saying, hey, what's the Y value? So we're going to add that in now by making the Y value go there. Now, we're going to set an initial value of X being down there. Now, there's a point where we need to also make sure that our Y value continues to update. Where our Y value continues to update like it's, so that we can have our animation run. So our Y value is going to increment every time it every frame. Okay, so we now got our ball and it's now stuck going back and forth, which is not really how balls bounce. A ball should bounce off here, yeah, and when it hits the top, it should bounce that way. So what we now want it to do is we now want it to go like a DVD player, right? So I don't know if you know DVDs, they used to have these screensavers where the ball would bounce off the sides. I don't know if that's still a thing, but anyway. So what do we need to do that is we need to have our two different speeds. We need to have a speed for X and a speed for Y. Now what I'd typically do is I would use camel case. We've talked about camel case, but camel case is little lowercase x, capital S. So that way I know that the words, where each word starts. Another way I could do is I could have X underscore speed, but because we use mouse Y and mouse X with capitals on the end, I'm just going to go with that. So I'm going to create speed, and the speed that's going to update when it touches the sides is going to be speed X, and the speed that it changes when it touches the top is going to be speed Y. So I'm going to create two variables. It says I've never heard of speed X, so I'm going to create a speed X and a speed Y. So now when it animates, it's going to use two different variables. Okay, so it's still using speed down the bottom. It's asking for speed, so I need speed X and speed Y. And now the ball bounces around like a DVD player. Okay. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to make the ball bounce if the X value is equal to the Y, so the mouse position. So that needs a different kind of formula. At the moment, we've only ever looked at something that's bigger or smaller, so using greater than or less than signs. Now what we want to do is we want the ball to go up, and up is a -2 in the Y direction. We want speed Y to be negative. We want that to happen if ever the X value is equal to the mouse X value. Now, when we use equals, remember, equals mean we pronounce the single equals as the word gets. So for the computer, if you're comparing two things, you're saying, is this the same as that? So if you're saying if X is the same as mouse X, we don't use the equal sign. Instead, to say same, we use a triple equal sign. Now, on some computers, you can get away with just a double equals, but that can be a little bit unreliable. So Khan Academy doesn't want you to have any mistakes. So it says, no, if you want to use the same, you have to use triple equals. Now, what will that mean is that whenever, well, sometimes it's a bit unreliable. If x is equal to mouse x. I did it once. There we go. So if the ball, if the x position, doesn't matter where it is, finally it doesn't even need to be touching. I can just do it down here. Yeah, it doesn't even need to be close for it to bounce. Now, if I want it to be close, right, if I wanted it to have the same x and the same y, for instance, I would have to use this symbol. And what this does is it lets me ask two questions at the same time. It says, if x is equal to mouse x, and at the same time, if the y value is equal to mouse y. Now this is really tough, right? Because now it has to be exactly to the pixel on the same spot, and this is actually pretty tough to get. Let's see, I could get it one time, but I couldn't get it the second time. Just want to get one more time. There we go. Okay, so we saw how that works. Now what I want is I only want it to work if it's actually at the bottom of the screen. So I only want it to work if it's the bottom of the screen. That's a pretty similar concept. So instead of it working when y equals mouse y, it's now I only want to do it when mouse y is greater than 375. I think I've missed a step. That's okay. We can do this anyway. We're going to go with 365. Why 365? I'll explain in a second. So now this is going to be even harder because now I have to get it perfect. I have to get it exactly the right line. So I have to get it, it has to be low, and I have to get it, so you saw it that work. I'll see if I can get it one more time. So it has to be low, it has to be down the bottom of the screen, and I have to touch the exact center of the ball for it to bounce. But it does work. Now, so that's what we'd rather is, rather than having just this arrow, we'd like to have something that was a bit wider, something that was a bit more useful. So I'm just trying to remember where my position is, about three-quarters of the way down. So with our steps, we'd looked at making the ball bounce top and bottom, making the ball bounce sideways, making the ball bounce back and forth, making the ball bounce like a DVD screensaver all around the screen. And then what we haven't done is we haven't made the ball bounce if it missed the side, which we have actually done. We just skipped that step, but that's okay. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a rectangle. So maybe around the time, where do we draw the ball? We draw, where's the ellipse line where we draw the ball? We draw the ball there. We're going to also draw a paddle. So the paddle we're going to draw is a rectangle, and we want this rectangle to be controlled by the mouse position. So the mouse position, we do that by using mouse X and mouse Y. We only want to use the mouse X position. We want the paddle to always stay at the same spot right at the bottom of the screen. So 10 pixels away from the bottom of the screen is 390, and I want it to be 40 wide, and I'm going to make it 10 high. Semicolon, there we go, I've got my paddle. So now I want to try and bounce the ball off my paddle, but we want to make it bounce not just if it touches exactly where the arrow is, but any part of the paddle. So that's a little bit tougher. So actually we might make our paddle a bit wider. 40 is fine, 40 is fine. So going back down to 3/4 of the screen, we've done that, okay. Now, the next part of the question is what we need to do is we actually want the ball, so using the pseudocode, if the ball's horizontal position is between A and B, so if we look here, we can see A is any area, this is the position of my paddle, A and B. So here it's hard for me to actually point, that side's A and that side's B. That's the X values. So in this case here, A would be 0 and B would be 40. Yep, 0 and 40. Whereas if I go here, say my A would be 200 and B would be 240. Okay, so if A and B, if the ball, if the X position of the ball is anywhere that's bigger than A, okay, well that's good. And we also want to bounce if it's the X position is anywhere less than B. So let's have a look at what we've got here. if the ball's position is between A and B, and the vertical position is near the bottom of the screen, then the ball should change the vertical direction. So let's have a look at what we've got here. So we've said, okay, where we want it to bounce is, well, that's 25 from the bottom. And I've said 390 because 390 is the top of my paddle. I've made my paddle 10 pixels long. So 390 is the top of that paddle. If we go up 25, 25 is the center of that ball. So what we want is, we actually want something, we're going to use this AND symbol, and what that means is, if we use the AND symbol, both things need to be true at the same time. The X value must be bigger than A, and the X value must be less than B. Okay, well, so let's use, what is the term for A and B? Well, A is mouse X minus 20, and B is mouse X plus 20. Right? So if we go down now, we can say if X is bigger than A, and X is less than B, and Y is greater than 365, right? 365 because 390 minus 25 is 365. Then Y speed gets -2. Now to make that a little bit simpler, we say we're using these values here. If A is bigger than mouse X minus 20, and if X is greater than mouse X minus 20, and X is less than mouse X plus 20, and Y is greater than 365, then Y speed gets -20. Minus 2. Which we could write as, if X is greater than A, and using the ampersand, which is shift 7 to get an ampersand, and X is less than B, then, so it's the same. And finally, we're going to use our whole code. If X is greater than mouse X minus 20, and X is less than mouse X plus 20, and Y is bigger than 365, then Y speed gets -2. So let's type that code in. So instead of it saying if X equals mouse X, what we're going to say, if X is bigger than mouse X minus 20, 20 because our paddle is 40, and X is less than mouse X plus 20, and our Y is greater than 365, then we should reverse the speed of our Y speed. Let's try that now. So now it will work. That was a very quick save. Now it only works when our mouse is in the screen. Now, did it drop below the... Sometimes you have to adjust the positions of the ball a little bit to make sure that things work. Okay, now that's working. So I'll just show you, this is one that I've done in P5.js. And P5.js is, I only like that because it's a way of sharing a program with other people without using Khan Academy. Just you can send someone a website. So like we saw here, where a student has made his one here and it just bounces. And if you die, he's added some text and the ball stops bouncing, which is pretty nice. Okay, so some other things. This is another example. So this one here only launches when you click the screen, which is pretty good. And so this is something you can look at afterwards, is you can try and using the keys to control your paddle instead of the mouse. So if you search for key code on Google and Khan Academy key code on Google, you'll find this example. And this example is very simple. It shows you that if you press the up key, it turns something red. Now in this case, if I change the word up to left, now this won't work on P5.js because these words are specialty words. Now it only works if I press the left key. These words are specialty words that only exist in Khan Academy. Now on this one, I've just modified that. So now I can move this ball by pressing the left and right keys. Now Khan Academy also has other challenges. So it has a challenge on how to make, once you know how to move the keys, you can make this challenge and you can make your own version of Pong that looks a little bit more like traditional Pong. And there's some crazy variants that other people have made, like Galaxy Pong, right? So, well, it's not that crazy, but it's only one player though. Whereas the Khan Academy one has an AI, and this one here has a menu. So it's pretty crazy. I'm this side of the screen here, and I'm not very good at this. You can shoot out blue balls, and you get shields. And if you hit the blue ball, then it slows down your opponent. So in addition to worrying about the ball, you can also try and hit your opponent, so that way they get slowed down. They're more likely to miss the ball. It's pretty full on, but it has a menu that you have in the screen. Now, a really extreme version for something as a project is being able to use the keys. One person using the keys and the other person using the mouse, or both people using one side of the key. So maybe one side of the keyboard is using W and S, and the other side is using up and down. Now that's obviously much more advanced, and that's beyond what we expect people to achieve in this lesson. But we wanted to put it out there as these are the possibilities that people can use. So good luck.